Welcome to the Biosphere / Ecology lecture. This lecture will cover a broad spectrum of subjects specifically revolving around the biosphere. By the end of this lecture, you will be able to define ecology, explain the levels of organization within the study of ecology, describe how energy flows within an ecosystem using a local ecosystem, and you'll be able to describe how matter flows within an ecosystem, again using a local ecosystem. So first, let's go ahead and begin with the definition of ecology. It is the scientific study of interactions among organisms and between organisms in their environment or surroundings. Let me repeat that one more time. It is the scientific study of interactions among organisms and between organisms and their environment or surroundings. So let's go ahead and first look at the environment and surroundings. We're going to go ahead and start big and then go small. The largest environment or surrounding that exists within ecology is the biosphere. For us, the biosphere is the Earth. The definition is the combined portions of the planet in which all of life exists, including land, water, and the air and atmosphere. On Earth, this is 8 kilometers above the surface, all the way down to 11 kilometers below the ocean surface. Within the biosphere, there is the biome. For us, our biome is in Colorado. There's a variety of biomes that do exist. It is a geographical region containing several ecosystems that have the same climate and dominant communities. Within a biome is an ecosystem. There's a collection of all the organisms that live in a particular place together with their non-living or physical environment. It is important to note the non-living or physical environment part. And next is the community. Community is an assemblage of different populations that live together in a defined area. And then within a community, you're going to have a population, which is groups of individuals that belong to the same species and live in the same area. And finally, the smallest is the species. And the species is a group of organisms so similar to one another that they can breed and produce fertile offspring. The key word being there, fertile offspring. So now let's go ahead and look at how energy flows within the biosphere, within ecosystems and whatnot. So energy flow is one way and only one way. The sun is the main energy source for life on Earth, and energy moves from producers to consumers. And so you're going to ask yourself, well, what is a producer? Well, just like the word implies, they produce their own food through complex chemical reactions that turn the energy from the sun, which is an inorganic form of energy, into an organic form of energy, such as sugar. And this is done through a complex process called photosynthesis, which we will learn about later on in the semester. And they can also use other sources of inorganic energy to produce different types of organic energy. Some of these include underwater vents, mineral water, and salt. Now, going from inorganic to organic is what we call an autotroph. So producers are sometimes called autotrophs. And then there are consumers. They cannot produce their own food, so they rely on other organisms for energy. Such as us human beings, we cannot produce our own food, so we rely on organisms such as plants, cattle, chicken, and whatnot for energy. These other organisms can be producers or other consumers. So in my example of human beings, the plants are producers and cattle and chicken would be other consumers. And sometimes consumers are called heterotrophs. So there are different types of consumers. One is a herbivore, which eats only plants. As the name implies, herb, meaning plants, vores, meaning eats. Eats only plants. Now carnivores, they can eat herbivores and other carnivores. And then there's omnivores, which eat plants and herbivores and carnivores. Then there's detritivores, which feed on bits of dead plants and animals called detritus. And finally, there's decomposers, which break down organic material. So let's go ahead and look at this, what's called a food pyramid. There are different types, and it's explained very well in this pyramid. So we have the soil, and beneath the soil are decayed detrivores, which are a type of heterotroph, and these are organisms such as worms, mushrooms, fungus, and all sorts of things like that. They help break down and return energy back into the soil. Now, above soil there are plants. Plants rely on soil for their energy, and they also rely on the sun for the energy, and they use those two to convert inorganic material into organic material such as sugars. Now there's herbivores such as squirrels, bugs, birds. They love to eat on plants and trees and whatnot for their energy. Now there's a primary predator, and these are the ones that tend to eat herbivores. And these include snakes, frogs, and whatnot. And then there's the secondary predator, which is at the very tip, and they're pretty much the king of the animal kingdom or an ecosystem, and something like a wolf or a bear. They eat the primary predators. They also eat herbivores. Now, within an ecosystem, there's also cycles of matter. Matter cycles in a certain direction. And matter is recycled within and between ecosystems. Biological systems do not use matter. They transform it from one form to another. And matter recycled via biogeochemical cycles connects the biological, geological, and chemical portions of the biosphere. So, one example of ways matter is cycled is what is called the water cycle. Now, it's not important for you to know exactly the process of the water cycle, since that is a little bit outside the scope of this lecture, but just note that water goes from one form to another. So, for example, it starts as precipitation, runs off in the mountains into lakes, streams, and the ocean, which then evaporation occurs, condensation into precipitation again. There's also transpiration, which is moisture from plants essentially evaporating and condensing into clouds. There's also nutrient cycles within an ecosystem, and that is ways something like the carbon cycle occurs. Now, it's not important to know exactly how this happens, just know that there is a way that carbon is cycled throughout an ecosystem and the biosphere. Another nutrient cycle that exists is the nitrogen cycle. Again, do not worry about how these are cycled through an ecosystem yet. Just know that it does exist, and we go from different forms of nitrogen due to different animals, plants, and organisms that live within our soil and above the soil. And finally, there's the phosphorus cycle, which is another nutrient cycle that exists. Again, do not worry about this. Just know that phosphate does cycle throughout an ecosystem through different organisms and bacteria that live within our soil. And that concludes our Biosphere lecture.